On any given week, 2/3 of the major characters are caught up in some kind of violence. Heroes are just as involved as villains. There is a great inequality as to the age, race, and gender of those on the receiving end of physical force. Old people and children are harmed at a much greater rate than are young or middle-aged adults. In the pecking order of victimage, African Americans and Hispanics are killed or beaten more than their Caucasian counterparts. It's risky to be non-white. It's also dangerous to be female. The opening lady in distress scene is a favorite dramatic device to galvanize the hero into action. And finally, blue-collar workers get it in the neck more often than do white-collar executives. Welcome to the Dead Kids Holiday Special, everybody. What I just read to you was a quote from George Gerbner. He died in 2005. He was the Dean of Emeritus at the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. He was the founder of the Cultural Environmental Movement. Cultural Environment Movement. There we go. So, cool dude. He and I noticed kind of an odd trend in media that we like. So, if you've watched this channel, which you haven't, I have 5 subscribers and most of this week's videos don't have any views. But I accidentally began uploading a horrific trend all at once, and I noticed that dead kids show up in our media a lot. And I made an apology video, and I really didn't mean for this to happen, but after I noticed the trend, I wanted to really delve deeper into this because I'm a weird person, and I find the macabre just as interesting as things that aren't. And I sat down, and I put on some happy music, and I set a timer for 1 hour. I grabbed a notebook with 32 lines on it, and I challenged myself to write down as many pieces of media that involve dead or endangered children as I could come up with no research off the top of my head. And then I stopped the timer when it said there was about 12 minutes left, because I had filled out my piece of paper. This is an odd trend that we have. And so with that list, I decided to break it down and look at why we have so many dead kids in our media. So I broke each of them down into very core things. So like one of them is shows the change in or loss of humanity, and that is not the loss of the child itself, but to show what it does to people when they are engaged with such loss. Then, of course, you get everyone's favorite establish a villain, and then anime power fantasy is also on there. Those show up a lot. One that's a little bit more rare, but it still is, it shows up a lot, and it's normally the point a lot of people like to make, which is just ethics is comfort. Is there's worse things than kids dying. Like a good example of that one is the Deadpool and Avengers time travel, where they bring up, what if we just went back and killed Hitler that as a baby? That is arguably a good action to do, but it still involves child murder. A lot of people would argue that, like, oh, someone else is going to rise to power. Shut up, Gordon. This is not a political podcast. We don't talk about politics. But still, there's a lot of ethics as comfort. And we'll get into the list. So, there are a few rare ones that showed up. There are a few. Not too many. So, the rarer ones were to show the fundamentals of faith, to express the tragedy of romance, to express the tragedy of war, to help engage with cosmic horror, to explore hubris, and then two that only showed up once, which is healthy and unhealthy ways of coping with loss, and ethics as an essential. So we'll get into how kind of fucked up that only one of those is. But I do finally, before we get into the list, I want to break down one last metric that I made, which was I put a gold star next to each of these where you have to have the child death or child endangerment for the plot to happen, which means there is no possible other way than for what happens to happen. Like, there's no other way to establish the villain. There's no other way to argue that ethics are something that is comfort or something that you need. I haven't really thought of a good way to break down the list. There is one thing I will say that the stars, the plot essential stars, I did not include in anything that anime power fantasy is the primary driving focus of the child endangerment. Because, like, in Dragon Ball, yeah, Goku is technically a child and he's in danger all of the time, but all it is he's Sun Wukong, he's Journey to the West, he's got the power fantasy, you know that he's pure at heart, he's the hero, he's gonna succeed. And so it kind of is the plot. It's not plot essential, it doesn't need to happen for the plot to go forward, but like whenever it's not happening, you also don't have a plot most of the time. But yeah, the big outlier there is Attack on Titan, because there's a lot of child endangerment for the power fantasy, but in like 2 episodes from, or no, it would have been like the last episode, yeah, 2 episodes ago from when I recorded this, they had an episode that involves some child murder that really, really gets into tragedy of war and whatnot. So why don't we just run down the list? I'll tell you what I think is, I'll share with you what got broken down into where, and you can, you know, leave a comment or whatever, whatever your favorite child deaths are, if you think that something in my list is wrong, but I'm just here to explore my own thoughts. I'm happy if you disagree, tell me why, and I don't have any traffic on my site, so I will most likely respond to you. Yeah, I'm not trying to get into like arguments or political debates or anything like that, so if you're just here to call names or say, well, this wouldn't happen if blah 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 or blah 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 blah, kindly go fuck yourself. This is not the place for that. Alright, so the list. So, start off, also, I want to say I tried to make a point of not just sticking to one medium. There's a lot of movies, there's a lot of TV shows, but there's a lot of other things in here. And we're going to start the list off with one of those, which is the religious story of Abraham and Isaac. So, I think this is interesting. Like, one of the very first stories in the 3 most prevalent religions in the world from the last time I checked. I don't do research for anything that I do. But from what I understand, the 3 most prevalent religions in the world all they share the story of a man going to go kill his son because God told him to, and then God being like, nah, don't do that, bro. It's just a prank. Yeah, filthy Frank comes out of the clouds. It's just a prank, bro. And then, yeah, they kill a sheep instead of a boy, and everybody celebrates. It's a good story. It shows the fundamentals of faith. That's one of the two that's on here, and it's you know good at showing the fundamentals of faith. It got itself a plot star. Obviously, you don't. The whole point of this story is that God is asking a man to do the unthinkable, but he knows that God is not going to lead him astray, so for whatever reason, he is going to go through with it, and God's like, wow, I'm really glad to have you as a follower. There's nothing wrong with your son. Please don't do what you're about to do. Um, and yeah, that's what faith is doing something that you don't know if you agree with or not on behest of someone that you assume knows better. And in the case of Abraham and literal God, who I'm pretty sure he like talked to, like literally like clouds parting or whatever. And so it's pretty easy to take it in good faith that the God is either going to do something to stop you, or maybe you should find, someone else. um, all right, so then we are going to jump forward a few thousand years, and we're going to get to some classic literature with the story of Dracula. Now, this did not earn itself a plot star, and you might be thinking, like, well, Jonathan Harker and Abraham Van Helsing are all adults. You're right. None of the main characters are children. But Lucy, I want to say it's Lucy, once Dracula gets back to London, or comes to London, and he transforms Lucy, one of the first places she hits up to engage in that hot vampire bloodlust is an orphanage. And I always have a particular memory of my my theater teacher when we put Dracula on. She made a necklace of children's shoes that our school would not let the actress playing Lucy wear. But that's part of the Dracula story, is that one of the first places that the newly transformed vampire women turn into, they go straight for an orphanage. And all this shows is it establishes a new villain, and it shows a change in and or loss of humanity. Because it's the same thing at the same time. The establishing the villain is the loss of the humanity in Lucy, but it also kind of delves further into the depravity of the vampires in the story. Like, it helps you hate the vampires more. Then we get into Ender's Game. There's the whole point of Ender's Game is ethics is comfort, so you got that. And then there's the whole change in and loss of humanity. Ender is a nice person. He doesn't like the fact that he's killing literal children like all the time, and he's bludgeoning and beating them in the first chapters. Like, he tries to go home because he's too nice for everything, and then the world says it doesn't matter if you're nice, you need to go be a murderer. And he promptly becomes a butcher. Dragon Ball establishes villain, and then, of course, anime power fantasy, because Goku. Dragon Ball really likes to establish its villains by threatening children. It's like Yamcha threatens Goku, Oolong's threatening a whole bunch of women. I'm pretty sure Assassin Tsao, or whatever his name is, he goes after the deer girl, the Native American girl or something. I think that's in Dragon Ball Z. That's when Gohan comes and saves her. Then there's so much. There's like Goku, Gohan, Goten. All of them get kidnapped or attacked at some point. Then I'm pretty sure Trunks gets killed, and that makes Vegeta go crazy at one point. There's a lot of villain establishment in Dragon Ball because of just due to child endangerment. And that might be one of the reasons why it's such a big trend in anime, is because Akira Toriyama is such a driving influence in a lot of the current fiction that comes out of Japan. Which, I mean, for good or for bad, it's just odd that it's very normalized in Dragon Ball, and something being normalized in Dragon Ball is normally a pretty good reason for it to be normalized in anime. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm not trying to slander Akira Toriyama. He makes really good stuff. I really like your stuff, Mr. Toriyama. I like it a lot. So then we got to Star Wars 3. Hey, we got another plot point. We gotta kill them younglings. We actually have to. There aren't any Jedi in the next movie. Someone's gotta kill all the little baby Jedi that George Lucas put in episode 1 before remembering, oh yeah, I need to slaughter all of these children. I need to murder them. And so yeah, we get the whole change and loss of humanity, establishes our new villain. Hey, we got a trend going on. I told you some of these are really common, but it does earn the plot star. So good job, Star Wars Episode 3. You are better than Dracula, Ender's Game, and Dragon Ball by a particular and specific metric. Oh, did you feel the hate that just happened? Star Wars 3, better than Dracula and Dragon Ball. Oh, I hate myself for saying that. Anyways, I already said Deadpool and Avengers for the time travel. They like to argue that ethics is comfort. Does not get a plot star. Does not. Both of those are just little side bits, but that's the most relevant. Everyone talks about how one of the first things you do with the time machine is you go back and kill Hitler, and like Doctor Who's done this. A lot of people have done it, but I feel like referencing a Marvel movie right now is probably the smart thing to touch a cultural stone. But that did lead me to think about one of my wife's favorite comic book storylines, which is the X-Men comic where Colossus's sister contracts the mutagen virus and dies. Hey, who wants to guess what this does? It is more change and loss of humanity, and eventually it leads to Colossus joining the bad guys, from what Brenda has told me, and so I guess it also establishes a villain. But you get your plot star, can't get evil Colossus, because he's literally like the nice guy of the X-Men team. You don't get him to go bad unless you do some of the worst things you can. And then we get an interesting one. I suppose I could have gone with Hamlet, but I chose The Lion King. Or not Hamlet. Whatever. I chose The Lion King. Establishes a villain, and we get some anime power fantasy. Leave, get stronger, come back. And again, plot relevant. You can't go meet Timon, Pumbaa, or Rafiki. Most of that just can't happen unless Simba gets exiled and chased for his life through a boneyard. And you could probably throw some loss of innocence in there. That's not really a metric I was using, but it is one of the few times where we see what the child endangerment does to the child. That does not happen very often. Yeah, the fact that I didn't even point that out. I guess that'll come up in later, but hey, that still falls under the catch-all that I wrote. So, then we get to Beauty and the Beast. I was in a Disney mood. So Beauty and the Beast, anime power fantasy. There's no real reason for her to technically be a prisoner. Like, I'd say establishes a villain, but everybody thinks the Beast is some hero in that film. He's the piece of shit, and everyone always is mean to Gaston, and that movie is a tragedy where a villain stays alive. the Renaissance happens like 10-ish years after the plot of that movie, and so like the beast being turned back into a prince means him and all of his servants get killed. So that's not even a good thing that they broke the curse at the end of the day. But I get weird with Beauty and the Beast. So we're gonna move on. No gold star. You don't need her to be a prisoner. You don't need her to be trapped. Fuck. I don't like that movie. The movie makes me sad. So the Hunger Games, more anime power fantasy. Doesn't get the plot relevant star because you don't get the plot without it. The whole point, I guess you could say, establishes villain, but like it's still, who's the villain? We live in a society. Oh wow, big statement. And we get to Goblin Slayer, classic anime. Argues some ethics as comfort. Then we get to The Lord of the Flies, which I put all of the above. It shows the fundamentals of faith, shows change and loss of humanity, shows that ethics are comfort. And of course, there's a lot of anime power fantasy in Lord of the Flies. Yeah, it's I would argue that Lord of the Flies does child murder really well. There's nothing. It's all child murder all the time. If you want child endangerment, go read Lord of the Flies. Hey. You know they make that you read that shit in schools. It's crazy, man. Alright, so oh god, this is a long recording. Alright, so we get to Romeo and Juliet, our next plot star. Yay, Romeo and Juliet. And we get to our next rare one, which is the tragedy of romance. I don't think I need to explain Romeo and Juliet to anyone who has made it this far. It's sad. They love each other, and it literally drives them to killing themselves when they think the other one is dead. It's sad. But plot star, and it does something different with what's going on. It takes something and actually makes a statement not about the child death. It uses it as a vehicle as opposed to being the point or just honestly a throwaway thing, as you're starting to recognize with this list. Or I was starting to recognize with this list at this point. Then we get another plot star. Game of Thrones, pushing kids out of windows. Episode 1 literally tried to kill him. Establishes villain, ethics as comfort. Hey, who would have fucking guessed? Mulan, the Disney film. There's the one doll that it's like everywhere throughout the movie because the one little girl had it, and so you remember the face of the little girl. It's tragedy of war. It's honestly pretty cheap, easy to do child murder. Good job, Disney. Then something that literally has come out within like the months of me uploading this, which is The Legend of Vox Machina. There's a bit where they establish villains by killing 2 human children in place of halflings or gnomes. Again, really cheap, easy child murder. Good job, Legend of Vox Machina. But this is where I want to bring up the fact that I've got something that literally has come out within the year of me recording this, and likely the start of the religion that the listeners to this are most familiar with. This is something that's happened throughout history, and it's something that is not going to stop. This is a real literary technique that we use. This is very strange. So, let's move on. We got The Fate of the Furious. So, I did not think The Fate of the Furious was gonna make it onto this list. But, yeah, it turns out Dom's betraying his whole crew so that he can save a kid that I don't remember him having in the last movies. It's strange. I don't like that movie. I'm not like a huge Fast and Furious fan, but like it's bad. I don't like it. That is definitely the cheapest plot star that I gave out on this list. Um, it was nice, simple, easy, and it made their plot the only way that it could possibly go. Um, so then, let's say that Abrahamic religions aren't quite old enough for you to be impressed by this list. We're gonna go to the painting. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm cultured. I know Kafka. I think this is a Kafka piece, but the Neptune eating his son, the tale of Kronos from the ancient Greek and Roman mythologies. Uh, yeah, it establishes a villain. It's old. It's as old as stories get, but it's not always good. It's not always it's not always what you want. Um, yeah, it's really cheap way to establish a villain. You make him like honestly, the eating your own son goes a little bit beyond. Like there's I could probably slot that into healthy and unhealthy ways of coping. But yeah, I think that it's also interesting that one entry it did a lot for me because it's the whole tale of Kronos from the the ancient mythology, but then since it's also the Kafka painting, I'm really showing off that this is not just a list of uh, stories. Like literally, we have paintings of people eating their own children, and obviously, a lot of people are disturbed by that painting. That's why it's so evocative. But I, a lot of people, when I told them that it was Dead Kids Week on my channel, they thought that I was doing some like crazy faux pas. But like, if you're gonna be mad at me for talking about dead kids, then I literally can't talk about any of these stories, and that's crazy to me. So we're gonna keep going with the list because we're not done. I'm gonna spend as much time on every single one of these as I feel like, because I've had a lot of mental stress over the last like 3 days since I realized this thing. So I'm just working my way through an existential crisis on the mic. Y'all can bear with me for that, or if you can't, make sure you leave a like, because I sure as hell don't like this shit. So once I realized that I was in the painting world, I thought, you know what? I need to get some video games in here. So, I went and Dark Souls. The pinwheel fight is comprised. It's a zombie necromancer guy who stitched the bodies of a father, a mother, and a child around his soul, and yeah, it's pretty dark. It is establishes the villain and quite literally the loss in humanity with this one because the dead kids affect his technical loss of humanity. Dark Souls joke. Ha 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 ha. Okay. All right. Then we get to our other, or we get to our first unique reason to kill children. So, in Sekiro, there is the pinwheel giant, or the pinwheel monk. He was a caretaker for children, and then the samurai came through, or the demon samurai, or whatever the plot of Sekiro is. I didn't actually beat that game. A bunch of demons came through and killed the children of the monastery, and he's constantly searching for them through the different pinwheels. And if you complete his quest line, which I took the time to do, you eventually take him to a spirit realm, where he can interact with all of the children that were under his ward, and you go around and help him collect the pinwheels for the kids. And it explores the fundamentals of faith. It explores the tragedy of war, but it's the only thing on this list that argues ethics as an essential part of ourselves. If he and the monks were pure of heart, then the demons wouldn't have come. If they held themselves to their holy standards, then they would have been able to repel the demons if someone else brought them to their doorstep. It's the literal evil of man's heart that the demons corrupt that ends up separating the children from their warden and then eventually leading to their deaths. And honestly, that's the saddest thing that I can possibly tell you, is that there's not a lot of people really saying how bad this is. It says, look at how bad that guy is because he did this thing. That's so cheap. It's like how Jeff Dunham can get away with saying supremely racist shit after the fall of the Two Towers because he was doing it with a Muslim puppet. Like, it's still a white dude saying the thing, but he's deflecting onto his villain. People understand that you get this visceral, unwanted feeling from watching bad things happen to children. We know that that's a thing, and so many people are willing to put others in discomfort but not be ready to accept that they're the ones that are doing it. They want the reward, but they're not ready to really dive into why they chose to do this. And I think that's really sad, guys. I'm not trying to be a bummer. I always like to be haha funny jokes on this channel, but if you're gonna, I'm not a writer. That's the thing, is I really want to tell people that if you're going to be putting something like this in your work, you need to take some notes from Sekiro and not Dragon Ball if you want it to be impactful. Or if you don't want it to be impactful, if you want it to just be what the hero does, find a better hero. Find a better driving force. You can do... and just don't make it repeatable. That's the thing. Like, I don't know. I think that you should just... I feel like we should expect better if someone's going to play with this kind of fire. I like seeing... that. Yeah, that's what it is I like big fireworks. I do. I don't mind the big emotional gut punch, which I'm really, really into, I forgot the name of the show. The new fairy tale. But, Eden Zero. Eden Zero is a great show, and it's full of emotional haymakers, one after the other. And it falls under this list almost entirely. And that is Dragon Ball Z forms of repetition, is if you're going to have the amount of evil in your world, you need Goku, or you need Shiki. You need an overwhelmingly powerful source of good. When you're watching The Legend of Vox Machina, it's a struggle. They might not win. And if you're going to keep putting child endangerment and child death forefront and center, but still be questioning if the heroes are going to succeed at the end of the day, that leaves everyone with an awful taste in their mouth, because they came here to get away from the real world. And in the real world, bad things like this happen, and we struggle to fight against it. And it's hard to escape from the real world when subliminally we recognize that these characters might as well just be working a 9 to 5 beat when the NYPD, and they're doing the same. Even if they're doing well, even if they succeed at the end of the day, if it was still a struggle, and they're weakened and they're tired and they're not ready to go save the next batch of dead kids, then that leaves your audience knowing that the world isn't good. They're not happy that they spent time there. That's my take on it. So, good job, Sekiro, making me think. Alright, more into video games. We got The Legend of Zelda. Establishes your villain, anime, power fantasy. Yeah, I can wax poetic all I want about the video games, but they fall into the same cheap child, whatever. Dead Space. This one's fun. Exploring cosmic horror. Technically rare, but it's a horror game in space. Of course, it explores cosmic horror. But it also expresses the hubris of man, because why the hell do you have so many children on your space stations? Those are not big space stations. Why would you have so many children? Craziness. Then we got your Halloween slashers. Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween. All of that is anime, power fantasy, and villain establishment. Of course it is. That's what you would expect. Ooh, now we get to Fairy Tale. And the death of Lysana is a lot. It expresses the tragedy of romance. It expresses the hubris of people. And this is going to be another down note because it's another unique thing. Healthy versus unhealthy ways of coping. There's a big difference between how Elfman and Natsu talk and act whenever Lysana gets brought up at the beginning of the show than at the end of the show. At the beginning of the show and right before season 4. And it's, again, that's an important thing. And Fairy Tale is a kids show. And if you're gonna be making children's media and you're gonna put child endangerment in it, accepting the fact that your friends are part of that endangerment is hard as a kid. And seeing Natsu and Elfman, who are a little kid, if a little kid watches Fairy Tale, those are the two people that they're going to identify with. Because Natsu's the protagonist, and then every little kid wants to be able to turn into a monster, and Elfman's a big manly man with the deep voice and the cool white hair. And you get to watch them struggle. You see the grief that really goes through with it. Like, it's visceral, and it really does change. Eventually, they are healthy enough to accept that, or even when you get to the other world where Lysana was teleported to, the Natsu and the Elfman there are telling her, hey, we know that you're not ours. We could tell the difference as soon as you showed up, and it was hard for us, but we couldn't let you know that we were grieving so much because we knew that we needed to keep you safe and happy so that you could return home one day. And man, I hate Otherworld, and I hate that they brought Lysana back to life, because it's a really big, cool driving narrative for Natsu and Elfman. They have some really hard scenes to watch because of their grief and what they're going through. And they start getting better, and then Lysana just kind of pops back in and makes all of that pain and work meaningless in the end. That it makes their progression moot. It makes it not valid because there was no reason for them to go through it in the first place. So I give you a gold star fairy tale, but then I do have to rip it away. Curse of Strahd, the written D&D campaign. We establish a villain right at the beginning. There's the Death House. Oh hey, it's a plot star. I bet you guys forgot about the plot stars. Attack on Titan. Again, like I said, there's the whole anime power fantasy thing going on, and I would not normally give it a plot star for that, but the whole choosing to save or kill a child, and then the repercussions of that being saving someone else and starting a war or dooming another person, essentially to what a lot of people would argue is a fate worse than death, or not war, and the lives that the singular lives that get muddled up to save multiple lives, and how messy that gets. And I honestly, it does. Attack on Titan is good at war. The whole point of Attack on Titan is that it's a war story, and it's hard to not like a lot of the things that it has to say, but it will not make you happy after any individual episode. Alright, we're almost done, boys. We got two more. So our last plot star is Rick and Morty. So again, this is kind of with Attack on Titan. Anime power fantasy, 100 million billion %. There's nothing about that show that isn't anime power fantasy. But particularly in the episode where Morty gets a sex robot pregnant and Rick wants to kill the thing that gets spat out, they do a pretty good job of arguing ethics is comfort. And cosmic horror. I didn't write that down, but cosmic horror too. Alright. Finally, we got Lost in Space. Tragedy of Hubris, cosmic horror. What can you expect? Danger Will Robinson. Okay. So, that's the list. Now you're thinking, Gordon. I counted. Over this 45-minute recording that you've made, I have counted, and that was not 30 titles. Gordon, that was not 32 titles. Fuck, I messed up this bit. No, it was only 30 titles. You're right. I've got two at the end, and these are the ones that really made me put down the pen and paper, stop the timer, and go take a goddamn shower. This is not a political podcast. This is not a political channel. It's not. But there is one particular trait that I think is weak when it comes to killing kids. And I got into this with the whole Sekiro doing it right. But if you only have one trait out of on this list, if you only have one, or if you only have one and then anime power fantasy stapled after it, in my opinion, you're doing it very, very wrong. You don't have the writing chops to be killing kids. So, don't write a villain that just kills a 5-year-old to say hi. Don't do that. It's bad. You shouldn't cheapen the deaths of what you're trying to sell as precious characters. If something's precious, you can't hand wave it away. That's what Sekiro got right. That's what Fairy Tail got right for like 5 seasons and then decided to jerk off in its own face for a little bit. I. So, yeah, if any of these things only has one staple to it, especially if it's only establishing a villain or the anime power fantasy, shame on you. No, honestly, you've made great popular work that people enjoy, and shame on you. Oh, hey, I did Game of Thrones. Shame. Shame. But seriously, the whole point of something being precious is that it is not cheap. So, let's get to my final 2 entries. So keep in mind, I think that you are the lowest of the low when it comes to entertaining content. I don't enjoy if you only have one thing stapled to this, and I especially hate it if all you're doing is establishing a villain with this. That is a bad way to establish a villain. You can do better. You can do your own story, because this story has been done. It's been done better, and you've got to really, really have an idea of why what you're saying is important if you're going to invoke something like this. So the last 2 entries on my list are every local news station and public service announcements and political ads. Because all they do is establish villains. I'm not, look, like I said, I'm not taking a stance one way or the other. But I will tell you that fear-mongering to people through their children is fucking disgusting. It is gross. So, I don't have anything in particular in mind. I don't. But you know that what I'm saying is true. It's to the point that Bo Burnham can make 2 references to a local news station talking about dead kids, and everyone eats up those songs because they're, you know, really good. And Bo Burnham likes to speak the truth to people. Alright, that's my list. Ugh. Where do we come down at the end of this? Should you kill kids? No, probably not. I think that you can kill kids in a good way. I think it can be positive for your story. But if you're going to murder a child, really know the consequences that that's going to bring to you and to your story. And keep in mind that if you build up something to be precious and then you cheapen that, you're cheapening the whole experience. Because if this one thing is what's precious to the characters and you cheapen that, the characters are cheaper and worse for it. It's very rare that you will find a character that is better off because they're surrounded by a bunch of small corpses. So, I guess that's the big takeaway, is really, really think to yourself if you're good enough to kill some children. That's my holiday special. Thanks for bearing with me. If anyone hears this part of this, I'll be surprised. But hey, you've been listening to me ramble on for 50 minutes now, so give me a like and a subscribe, shill for the channel. And yeah, second week of March. I'll see you next year.